In democratic government, power is supposed to leave a paper trail. Policies are debated, budgets are approved, and military actions are authorized through visible procedures. Oversight exists so the public can later understand what was done in its name, and why. But history contains moments when leaders decide the system is too slow, too restrictive, or too uncertain for the world they believe they face. In those moments, the state can create a second version of itself, a hidden structure operating alongside official institutions. It may begin as a narrow exception, a quiet workaround for what officials describe as an emergency. But once secrecy becomes normal, the logic expands. Rules are treated as obstacles rather than foundations. Oversight becomes the enemy. The mission becomes the justification. In the mid-1980s, the United States, a country still shaped by the trauma of Vietnam and the scandal of Watergate, experienced exactly that. Publicly, Washington insisted it would not bargain with kidnappers. Publicly, Washington insisted it would not sell arms to hostile regimes. Publicly, Washington insisted it would not fund private wars that Congress had prohibited. Yet behind the scenes, a small network inside the national security system did all three. The result was the Iran Contra Affair, a scandal that combined international arms deals, hostage negotiations, covert warfare, secret financing, document destruction, and constitutional conflict over who controls American foreign policy, the president or Congress. Unlike Watergate, which centered on a break-in and a cover-up, Iran-Contra was a system, a complex web of actors, channels, and decisions that blurred legal lines and tested democratic limits. This is the story of how that system formed, how it operated, how it collapsed, and what it revealed about power. To understand Iran-Contra, you first have to understand what happened before it. In the 1970s, American confidence was shaken. Vietnam ended with images of evacuation and defeat. Watergate exposed political sabotage and corruption at the highest level. The public learned that presidents and intelligence agencies had run secret operations, including coups, assassinations, and domestic spying, with minimal oversight. Congress responded by trying to restore balance. New intelligence committees were created to supervise covert actions. Laws were strengthened so that secret operations would be reported to lawmakers. The goal was not to eliminate intelligence work, but to place it under democratic control. At the center of this post-Vietnam settlement was a key idea. The executive branch cannot run foreign wars in secret. Presidents still had wide authority, but the assumption was that major operations must eventually be accountable, especially when they involve money, weapons, or military force. This was the atmosphere Ronald Reagan inherited in 1981. Reagan entered office with a different interpretation. He believed the post-Vietnam restrictions had weakened the country. He believed the Soviet Union was advancing because the United States had lost its will. And he believed that in the Cold War, American survival required decisive action, even if it created controversy. Reagan's presidency promised a return to strength. That meant military buildup, ideological clarity, and aggressive opposition to communist influence. And few regions symbolize that conflict more than Central America. In 1979, Nicaragua's long-standing dictator, Anastasio Somoza, was overthrown by the Sandinistas, a revolutionary movement with left-wing ideology and ties to Cuba. To many in Latin America, Somoza's fall looked like the end of a corrupt US-supported dictatorship. To the Reagan administration, it looked like something else, another Cuba, a socialist government that might export revolution across the region. Washington feared a chain reaction. Nicaragua today, El Salvador tomorrow, then Guatemala, and eventually instability reaching Mexico and beyond. So the US began supporting an armed opposition to the Sandinistas, the Contras. The Contras were not one unified movement. They included former members of Somoza's National Guard, anti-Sandinista peasants, and various armed factions with different motives. The CIA helped train, equip, and guide them. But the Contra War quickly became controversial. Reports of human rights abuses emerged, attacks on civilians, intimidation campaigns, and violence that looked less like legitimate resistance and more like terror tactics. There were also accusations that some Contra units were connected to criminal activity, including drug trafficking. By 1982 and 1983, members of Congress became alarmed, not only by the moral implications, but by the constitutional precedent. They argued the executive branch was dragging the country into a hidden war without authorization. The result was the Boland Amendment, a set of laws passed over time that restricted U.S. assistance to the Contras. The central message was simple. Congress forbids U.S. agencies from supporting efforts to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. That meant no CIA funding for the Contra War, no Defense Department support, no secret pipeline of taxpayer money. To many legislators, this was a clear boundary. To many in the Reagan administration, it was an intolerable constraint. And that clash between Congress's power of the purse and the executive's drive to act became the first engine of Iran Contra. Ronald Reagan saw the Cold War as more than a strategic competition. He saw it as a moral struggle, freedom against tyranny. In that worldview, communist victories were not just geopolitical setbacks, they were moral failures. And anti-communist insurgents, even flawed ones, were often framed as freedom fighters. Reagan famously described the Contras as the moral equivalent of the Founding Fathers. That statement was not simply rhetoric. It reflected an internal conviction shared by many advisors. If the United States abandoned the Contras, it would be abandoning the cause of liberty. This mattered because when policymakers believe they are fighting for a moral absolute, the law can start to feel secondary. Some officials argued that Congress was naive, or manipulated by public opinion, or unwilling to face reality. Others believed the restrictions were temporary and could be circumvented until political winds shifted. But the Boland restrictions were not vague. They were legal boundaries. So the question became, if Congress says no, what does the executive branch do? The answer, inside parts of the Reagan national security structure, was not to stop, but to reroute. If they could not fund the Contras directly, they would find outside money, from private donors, from friendly governments, and eventually from secret profits. To make that possible, they needed operators, people willing to work in the gray zones of government. One such figure would become central, Oliver North. While Central America was a major focus of Reagan-era Cold War policy, another crisis dominated headlines: the Middle East. In 1979, Iran's revolution overthrew the Shah, a key U.S. ally. The new Islamic Republic positioned itself against American influence. The U.S. Embassy hostage crisis that followed traumatized the American public and helped define Iran as an enemy. By the mid-1980s, U.S. policy included an arms embargo against Iran. Selling weapons to Iran was both politically unthinkable and legally restricted. But Iran was also fighting a devastating war with Iraq, a conflict that consumed hundreds of thousands of lives. Iran was desperate for spare parts and weapons. Meanwhile, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, was also seeking support, and both sides were accused of brutal tactics. In the same era, Lebanon descended into civil conflict. Within Lebanon, American and Western targets were attacked, and foreigners were kidnapped. Several Americans were held hostage by militant groups with connections, direct or indirect, to Iran's political and religious networks. These kidnappings created immense pressure inside the Reagan administration. Reagan personally cared about hostages. He saw them not as abstract policy problems, but as human lives the government had a duty to recover. This created a second, separate motive that would intertwine with Contra funding. 1. Secure the release of American hostages in Lebanon. And 2. Find money to support the Contras despite Congress's restrictions. These two motives would merge into one operation. And once they merged, they produced a scandal larger than either issue alone. The core concept that later became Iran Contra can be summarized in one sentence. Sell weapons to Iran through intermediaries and use the proceeds to fund the Contras. But that concept did not emerge fully formed. It developed through smaller decisions, each justified as a limited exception. Some officials argued that Iran was not monolithic, that there were moderates who might be engaged and hardliners who might be weakened. If the US opened a channel to moderates, it could reshape Iran's future and reduce Soviet influence. This was sometimes described as a strategic opening, a way to gain leverage in the region. At the same time, hostages remained the emotional driver. The hope was that Iranian intermediaries could pressure hostage holders in Lebanon. So the first arms deals were framed as instruments of diplomacy and rescue. Weapons as a means to influence Tehran, and influence as a means to free hostages. But the Contras remained the unanswered problem. Even as Congress restricted aid, many in the administration continued to view Contra survival as necessary. The idea emerged that profits from the Iran arms deals could be diverted to help the Contras. This diversion was the step that transformed a secret diplomatic initiative into a constitutional crisis. Because selling arms to Iran was already controversial. But using the money to fund a forbidden war, without Congress, turned controversy into illegality. To make it work, the operation required intermediaries to handle transactions, secrecy to avoid political collapse, and a structure capable of moving money outside normal government budgets. That structure soon took shape inside the National Security Council staff. Oliver North was a Marine lieutenant colonel assigned to the National Security Council, or NSC. The NSC was not designed to be an operational agency like the CIA. Its purpose was advisory, to coordinate policy across defense, intelligence, and diplomacy. But in the 1980s, some NSC staff became deeply involved in operational activity, partly because they were close to the president and could move faster than bureaucracy. North became a central coordinator of Contra support efforts. He worked with private fundraisers, foreign governments, and intermediaries to keep money flowing. As restrictions tightened, the system became more creative and more legally risky.
Can you look at Exhibit 308? Is that your writing on the...
That is my writing.
And it's headed United States Proposal?
That's what it says.
Now, is that a proposal that you presented to the second channel?
I'm sure it was. I don't recall whether this was done at the meeting in Washington or the meeting in Europe, but I'm...
North's network included private individuals who arranged shipments, created shell organizations, and opened bank accounts. Money could be moved through Switzerland or other channels that created distance from official oversight. This is where the shadow government aspect becomes clear. Rather than the US government formally approving operations, individuals associated with government power enabled and facilitated them through unofficial means. Critically, this system depended on secrecy, not only from the public, but from Congress, and sometimes even from parts of the executive branch. It was not simply covert, it was compartmentalized. And once compartmentalization becomes the norm, accountability becomes difficult. People can claim later they did not know. Others can claim they were following orders. The system becomes a maze. That maze would later define the investigations. The arms sales to Iran did not occur in the open. They moved through intermediaries, including foreign governments and private actors, so that the United States could maintain plausible deniability. Israel played a role as an intermediary in some early shipments, reflecting Israel's regional interests and its own channels of communication. Arms involved included items like TOW anti-tank missiles and components related to Hawk anti-air systems, among other supplies.
You're really saying then that that your government can bring about the release of these hostages if, for example, it gets better treatment from Western governments?
It depends to those who are holding that. We just issue command. We just advise those who may be in one way or other involved in the process of hostage taking.
The logic was that Iran would receive weapons, and in return, help facilitate hostage releases.
Good afternoon. The 39 Americans held hostage for 17 days by terrorists in Lebanon are free, safe, and at this moment on their way to Frankfurt, Germany. They'll be home again soon. This is a moment of joy for them, for their loved ones, and for our nation.
When hostages were freed after shipments, some officials took it as proof the strategy worked. But the pattern was unstable. New kidnappings occurred. Releases were partial. Demands continued. In practice, the policy risked creating a market, weapons in exchange for hostages, encouraging further hostage-taking. Meanwhile, the internal secrecy deepened. The more controversial the activity became, the more participants tried to reduce written evidence. Some records were limited or shaped in ways that minimized legal exposure. At the center of it, Oliver North helped oversee financial arrangements. At higher levels, National Security Advisor John Poindexter was involved in approving aspects of the operation. Before him, Robert McFarlane had served as National Security Advisor and was linked to early phases of the effort. And above all, the president's attitude mattered. Reagan publicly insisted the U.S. would not negotiate with terrorists. But privately, his administration pursued a policy that looked very much like negotiation. As the arms deals escalated, the risk of exposure grew. And as the risk grew, so did the temptation to manage it through a cover narrative. The turning point of Iran Contra was the diversion of funds. Here's the essential mechanism. 1. Iran paid for weapons, often at inflated prices. 2. The money moved through intermediaries and accounts. 3. A portion of the funds, the difference between cost and price, became profit. 4. Those profits were redirected to help the Contras. This was not authorized by Congress. It also raised serious legal questions. Even if the arms deal itself could be argued as foreign policy, the diversion looked like a deliberate attempt to evade the Boland restrictions. In other words, it looked like officials were saying, Congress forbids it, therefore we will do it anyway and hide it. That is why the scandal became a constitutional crisis, because it challenged the idea that elected representatives control government spending. The diversion also revealed another dynamic. Once money is outside official systems, control becomes uncertain. Operations can expand without oversight, and responsibility becomes blurred. Participants could later claim they assumed others had approved it. Others could claim it was a misunderstanding. But the end result was the same. The executive branch, through unofficial channels, was enabling a war Congress had prohibited. This was the heart of the scandal. Everything else, hostages, Iran, intermediaries, mattered. But the diversion was the point where secrecy met illegality most directly. Large covert operations require discipline, but they also create pressure. When secrecy becomes absolute, truth becomes dangerous, not just to reputations, but to careers and administrations. As rumors circulated and questions arose, officials increasingly relied on denial. Congress asked about Contra support. Administration statements insisted restrictions were being followed. Journalists raised concerns, and they were often dismissed. Inside the system, participants understood the stakes. If the operation became public, it could collapse Reagan's presidency, damage U.S. credibility, and create criminal liability. That pressure contributed to document destruction. As investigations later revealed, some materials were shredded or altered, especially when the scandal began to surface. Participants tried to remove evidence that could link officials to illegal activity. This is a classic pattern. Covert actions become politically lethal, and the response becomes a cover-up. Not necessarily a single coordinated plot, but a series of individual decisions made in panic. In Iran Contra, the cover-up was not as centralized as Watergate's. It was fragmented, consistent with the fragmented nature of the operation itself. But the impact was the same. It obstructed accountability and deepened suspicion. And eventually, despite the secrecy, the operation was exposed. In late 1986, reports emerged that the United States had been involved in arms sales to Iran. For many Americans, this was shocking by itself. Iran was the country of the 1979 hostage crisis, the symbol of anti-American revolution. The idea that Washington had sold weapons to that regime contradicted years of public policy and political rhetoric. But the story did not stop there. As journalists and investigators dug deeper, the second revelation emerged. Money from the Iran arms deals had been diverted to the Contras. That was the moment the scandal became a political earthquake.
Theodore Shackley, who was Assistant Deputy Director of Operations for the Central Intelligence Agency as of 1976, under George Bush, who was CIA Director at the time. Thomas Kleins, who worked as a case officer under Shackley in Miami and in Laos. Rafael Chichi Quintero, an anti-Castro Cuban who worked under Kleins and was allegedly recruited by the CIA as an assassin. General John Singlaub, who worked with Shackley and Kleins in Vietnam and was in charge of the CIA's special operations over the border into Laos. General Richard Secord, who supervised the air operations into Laos and was later assigned to the Pentagon, where he was put in charge of arms sales to Iran. Albert Hakim, who was a salesman for U.S. weapons companies,
because it suggested a deliberate strategy to bypass Congress. Suddenly, the operation was no longer a controversial diplomatic gamble. It was a constitutional problem. It was potentially criminal.
There exists in operation now a secret team of some 24 men, former Central Intelligence Agency covert operatives, former U.S. Pentagon arms suppliers, who have joined together in a private enterprise outside of the control of the American government, either the Congress or the President, who are mounting their personal wars around the world.
The White House faced an immediate crisis. How much did the President know? Who authorized the diversion? Were U.S. officials negotiating for hostages? Were laws violated? How widespread was the cover-up? The administration began internal inquiries. Congress launched investigations. A special prosecutor would later be appointed.
Yet Greg denied it.
But he contacted someone who worked for you?
No.
He contacted you indirectly in some way?
No. Greg later admitted that wasn't true. But then just 3 days ago, Greg again denied any involvement with the Contras.
Mr. Gregg, do you still insist that you played no role in aiding the Contras between 1982 and 1987?
Yes, I do. But
And soon, the nation watched hearings that turned the scandal into a public spectacle, one where the lines between patriotism, illegality, and political theater became blurred. The Iran Contra hearings became one of the defining media events of the 1980s. Televised testimony brought classified worlds into living rooms. Americans watched officials describe secret bank accounts, covert shipments, and internal debates about law. At the center stood Oliver North. North testified in uniform, presenting himself as a disciplined soldier serving national interests. He admitted to actions that would normally end careers: misleading Congress, destroying documents, operating unofficial channels. But he framed them as necessary, as acts done to protect the nation and rescue hostages.
I never personally discussed the use of the residuals or profits from the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran for the purpose of supporting the Nicaraguan resistance with the president. I assumed that the president was aware of what I was doing and had, through my superiors, approved it.
To some viewers, North's testimony confirmed wrongdoing. To others, it made him a symbol of anti-communist resolve. This division mattered because political scandals are not only about facts, they are also about interpretation.
He told me specifically, get rid of things, get rid of that book, because that book has in it the names of everybody, the addresses of everybody. Just get rid of it and clean things up. And I did so.
North's supporters argued, Congress tied the president's hands. The Contras were fighting communism. Saving hostages was worth taking risks. Bureaucratic rules should not block moral action. Critics argued, the law exists precisely to prevent secret wars. Negotiating through arms deals encouraged terrorism. Human rights abuses by Contras made support immoral. Government officials cannot decide they are above oversight. The hearings also exposed how unclear responsibility had become.
Director Casey had specific and detailed knowledge because I briefed him frequently.
Some officials claimed they did not know about diversion. Others suggested they assumed authorization existed. Documents were missing. Notes were incomplete. Testimony was contradictory. The system that secrecy had built now became a defense. If everything was compartmentalized, no one could easily be held accountable. This is why Iran Contra felt like a scandal without a single clear mastermind. A network where responsibility was spread, denied, and blurred. But the question at the top remained unavoidable. What did President Reagan know, and when did he know it? As political pressure grew, investigations multiplied. One major inquiry was the Tower Commission, established by Reagan and led by former Senator John Tower. Its purpose was to examine the NSC's role and the administration's management of covert operations. The Commission's findings criticized the chaotic structure of decision-making and the lack of oversight within the White House. It portrayed an administration where procedures had broken down and where the president had not maintained tight control over key operations. Meanwhile, independent legal investigations continued. Several officials were indicted, including prominent figures connected to the operation. Some were convicted, though legal outcomes became complicated by appeals and questions about immunized testimony during congressional hearings. Oliver North, for example, was convicted on charges including obstruction-related offenses, but parts of his conviction were later overturned due to legal issues around compelled testimony. Other figures faced different outcomes, some convictions, some reversals, some plea arrangements. The legal record became complex, and for many Americans, the political story overshadowed the courtroom details. One of the most controversial chapters came later, when presidential pardons were issued for key Iran Contra figures, effectively ending many remaining legal consequences. This raised a deeper question. If the executive branch can pardon those involved in a scandal linked to executive power, what does accountability mean?
Mr. President, what did you know about money going to the Contras?
All I know is this is just going to taste wonderful, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Vice President Bush, did you know about the Contra aid or not, sir?
In the end, Reagan left office without impeachment or resignation. His popularity recovered. The scandal damaged but did not destroy his presidency.
Congress's absolute power to fund the foreign policy of America was subverted by a White House that was determined to do something else, that converted American military hardware to money, and that some of that money found its way into supporting a policy that a majority of the Congress had opposed. I think when you get into that kind of constitutional subversion, You've got a very serious matter in your hands, and those who think it was, quote, a blip, don't understand the Constitution. That's what I believe.
When I hear you talk, I hear Warren Rudman talking about high crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah. Well, if the president himself had known that, it would have been. There was no proof that he did.
That outcome shaped how Iran-Contra is remembered. Unlike Watergate, it did not end with a president removed. It ended with a president politically bruised, but intact, and with many participants eventually returning to public life. But the larger meaning of Iran-Contra lies beyond individual fates. It revealed how secrecy can become a substitute for democratic debate, how ideology can push officials to bypass law, and how oversight can be neutralized when operations move into private channels. It also highlighted an enduring constitutional tension. Foreign policy requires flexibility, but democracy requires accountability. Iran-Contra showed what happens when flexibility becomes freedom from rules.
I sensed that we were sending arms, and I sensed we were trying to get hostages out, but not arms for hostages.
Did you really begin to smell a rat here? I mean, did
Not
you begin
really.
to say
No.
This is beginning to smell like arms for hostages? I
Not
don't
really.
Like this one
I
bit.
could see that it got a little close, but not enough to say, no, this is not arms, that this is purely arms for hostages. But you know, I'll tell you, I saw some reference in one of these stories to the 9 o'clock meetings. Let me tell you how it works. Somebody comes in there, like there's Don, Reagan, me, and the president. Anybody hearing new on the hostages today? We got heard of that? And has it moved forward at all? No, but we'll ask Poindexter. Poindexter would come in the room. No, we haven't had a report. That's the end of that meeting. Then you go and talk about the budget or talk about something else.